Hey everyone, and welcome to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Debris Season 1, Episode 3. It's called Solar Winds. So, full spoilers for the episode, as always. So, Episode 3, am I still enjoying the show? I am. I am finding myself kind of looking forward to this a little bit now. Not that it's like spectacular or or anything like that, but it's filling a particular void of a very specific type of TV show that I've not had in a while. Even just the idea that there's a good network style show on a weekly basis that I'm into watching. It's been a while, so I think it's filling some voids for me that I'm enjoying, and I do think it's for an early season 1 network TV show. I think it's doing a pretty decent job presenting me interesting ideas. I think the concepts that have been introduced in all 3 episodes have been to varying degrees of success in terms of, oh, that's kind of cool or strange or interesting. This episode, we start with this vague square that just kind of appears in the middle of a field. I think it's, what was it, Idaho? I don't know. One of the I states, but it appears in a field. And at first it's just this kind of fog-like square with perfect edges, but then when the woman who's there gets close to it, there's some shadows within, and it's like people are trying to get out of a weird prison. There's some cool shots later on when Brian's there later and he walks around and looks around the back of it, and you can kind of see that it is, as far as we can see, 2-dimensional. There's no depth to it. Like, he walks around the other side and it just looks like the mirror image on the other side. Cool stuff. And this episode in particular presents some ideas that are separate from the debris. Now, the debris is why we're seeing this, and the debris that they ultimately find in the field or in the woods nearby is why we're having a chance of actually witnessing what this is. But the actual thing itself, where these people are and what's going on, is not caused by the debris. It actually ties into something that Finola's father had theories on, and we see video of that later of him talking about this at a lecture. This idea of extra dimensions that are not quite like, to compare it again to Fringe, which is the thing that I always bring up to compare this show to. It's not like alternate realities where there's like alternate versions of people walking around. It's more like dimensions, planes of existence that we just don't understand. They're just kind of surreal to us, and we can't really comprehend what they are. And from the sounds of like Nicole, the character who we eventually kind of meet, who's trapped inside this dimension, she doesn't really seem to understand where she is. It's all very kind of vague and dreamlike to her. Time's moving at a different rate, which is a really cool concept as well. Particularly when we get towards the end of the episode and they do free her and everyone else who was in there, who Nicole herself was not aware that there was others. She couldn't see other people. We find out that they're all from different time periods. She disappeared. She was a missing person in 2019, but some of the other people we hear from briefly are from the 70s and 80s, and they think they've only been gone for a little while. Although Nicole herself does describe that even though it doesn't feel like a lot of time has passed, it also feels like a long time. Which made sense when she said it. It made sense that like it didn't feel like time had passed, but it felt like the feeling was that it was going very slow, I guess was the exact phrasing she used. Which it kind of makes sense. It actually kind of it kind of sounds like being asleep in a weird way. When you wake up, you can tell time has passed, but you're not aware of the time passing as you sleep. But when you've woken up, it feels like time has passed. Maybe that's not an exact comparison, but it's kind of what it made me think of a little bit. But cool ideas. I don't think for a second that this has been introduced just for a one-off episode. This seems conceptually like such a huge, cool idea that this is a seed for something that they want to do with this later, whether it's later this season, whether it's something they're going to hopefully do, way into the overall narrative of the show if they do get more seasons and they get to finish it the way they want to. Obviously, episode 3 into season 1 is far too early to say if that's even feasible, but this definitely feels like a narrative construct that's been set up that can be paid off much, much later. Because they talk about how the piece of ship that's causing this, the reason why it's showing us this, and the reason why it's part of these signals and them speaking or coming through to us, which is a cool visual and all that of itself, and hearing the voice and the static and sort of trying to like get through to her, bringing in Nicole's father because as the emotions heighten, it seems to get stronger. And again, that human heart that the show's very much had in all 3 episodes of trying to have that human story at the center of it. And I realize that may be a bit saccharine for people, and it might be definitely dependent on your taste whether or not you think that stuff lands. I've been mostly okay with it so far. It definitely feels like it's saccharine, but like saccharine, not overdosed to the point where I'm not into it. I think just the little things like the music and whatnot did help, and I'm still enjoying it. People aren't in love with the music. I've been mostly enjoying it. There's one moment in this episode where it goes a little bit almost Inception kind of horn, where that was the one time it stuck out to me as doing something that I felt was a bit off. But for the most part, I kind of like the overall aesthetic of the music and the kind of the tone that it brings to the show. The kind of the particularly sort of synthy strings that it has, and it's going for a very particular feel, and it's something that I'm happy to return to, that I'm happy to come back to each week. But yeah, so the piece of the ship, the debris specifically that was creating or connecting to this dimension, it's theorized that this piece of ship is part of the navigation technology from the ship, and that this was not only how they navigated through interstellar space but also intradimensional space, and that perhaps they didn't just travel through space physically in the way that we would normally think. We think of a spaceship just going through space and eventually getting to Earth. That maybe they take, and I'm adding this word in here, but maybe the reason why they go through another dimension is because it's a shortcut, because obviously distances in space are super vast. Whenever you're watching a sci-fi movie with space travel, the subject of either faster than light travel, jump speed or jump gates, or cryo sleep, because it takes thousands of years to get to anywhere reasonable. Maybe this is the solution here, is that these alien beings, whoever they are, would take shortcuts through this other dimension and use it as a sort of a fast lane, as it were. So it's an interesting concept, for sure. And I think that is, some good sort of questions to be raising at this point for the characters to be to pondering. And I think the characters pondering over things and discussing what maybe is going on, discussing what this square could be, what the people inside could be, realizing that this could relate to Finola's father's work and missing people and all that. I think there's a bit of a tightrope to walk on with that stuff, where sometimes I really like that the characters are smart enough to start theorizing and just go and like, hey, we've seen enough shit from this debris that we know that these weird sci-fi things are happening. We know that stuff that's beyond the realm of normal real world logic and physics is happening. So let's think outside the box. Sometimes they maybe go a little too smart to the point where they're jumping to conclusions where, it's maybe unnatural that they were able to figure something out that sounds like it might actually be correct. But for the most part, I think the ongoing threads of these characters and getting to know them, it's going very slow. There's definitely no debate in that, but the threads are still there, and they are kind of reminded of them again. Brian asks about Finola's father at the start of the episode, which there's a team from the CIA going to dig up and look at his body, see what's going on there. And that we'll get answers a little bit on that later on, of course, but specifically with Brian and Finola, there's a moment where she gets emotional watching her father's speech, and the guilt that Brian has in his face in this moment, seeing that this affects her, because he even at the start of the episode tries to kind of get her transferred, thinking that this might be too hard for her to take, or it might affect her. I think I'm going to call bullshit on that a little bit. I think this is actually him almost trying to guard himself from the confrontation, the emotional confrontation that this will eventually lead to if they are still together. It's not that I don't think he likes her or that he likes working with her, or that he sees her as a valid partner or anything like that. I think much like we saw in episode 1, where he had to leave the room because he couldn't deal with the fact that things were getting emotional, this is him sort of preemptively trying to do that with her. Like, he knows this is going to get a lot more heartfelt and emotional and confrontational and heated, and he's going to be right in the middle of it, and I don't think he wants any part of that. So he tries to kind of sidestep it early on, and Maddox says, "No, let's see how this plays out," kind of thing. And he's got his own stuff, obviously. I'll get to in a minute, but so he's being true to who he is as a character. It's still playing with the guilt of knowing her father is alive, and those little plot threads are still there. Even the fact that this episode is about a father and a daughter. I haven't spoken much about that yet, but Brian and the father. I actually thought the scenes of like telling him what was going on, explaining that they've encountered something, and that maybe wherever she went, because they bring up the Bermuda Triangle to try and explain it, that there's maybe other places like this all over Earth that are just access points to another dimension. That's all it really is. And I thought the scene was good in the sense that they very quickly, immediately played the recording of her voice, because I thought, oh, this is going to sound absolutely nuts to him if you don't, but they immediately do it. It kind of felt like they seem to always know what they were doing in terms of pacing out the information to this character. But I thought the scenes with him were fairly solid. I think they never felt like just crappy TV drama. I thought he did a decent enough job. The actor was decent enough at kind of making this work. But because it's a father and a daughter, and you have this father saying he regrets not saying he loves her enough and things like that, and having Finola be the one to comfort him, feeds into her feelings with her father and her kind of sense there. Especially since we ultimately know that she's going to discover that her father has in some way lied to her. I mean, one of the bigger lies that someone can tell someone. I mean, they're not even, I say, quote unquote tell. You don't really tell someone you're dead, but giving the impression that you are dead, pretty big lie. So that stuff I think is fairly solid in the episode, and it's another example I think of the main mystery, the main sort of like weird anomaly that's happening. And I think that's a good word for the stuff that happens on this show. They are anomalies, and they feel kind of like that. We got a lot more of this the sort of tech science character who's got a bit of an attitude on him this episode, and I wasn't sure how to necessarily feel about his kind of like rift with Brian throughout the episode. I did get a minor chuckle when they're trying to like talk to him about how can we do that? How can we try and save these people? He tells Brian to get a box out of the fridge, and then he opens it, and it's just his lunch, and he starts eating his lunch because there's no hope. Like we talk about, there's nothing we can do. There's nothing that we can do without the debris. Because at this point in the episode, they hadn't found that yet. And once they do, it's notable that he's like, "No, we need to send this back to the lab immediately. We have to start working on this. This could be our first taste of interdimensional travel." He doesn't want to use it, whatever power's left in the device. He doesn't want to waste it on saving a few people. And of course, Finola's like, no, if we don't use this to save people, then we're not we're not worthy of having this technology. So some ideological debates, of course, are going to come up. Which, and just before I go into the Maddox stuff, there is definitely, obviously a little bit more of influx. They're at the crash site of this debris. They obviously teleport last second before they're properly spotted, but they know they were there because of the truck, and they're looking into it. So again, another little plot thread that's just kind of, tagging along as we go. But I think what I'll say about this main plot, though, what I like about it, more than anything, I think the actual anomaly side of things, I probably was more into last week's episode. But I will say I do kind of love that this wasn't something that was caused by the debris. The debris just let us see it was already happening. The idea that this is just a scientific sort of idea that we have not yet been able to really explore, something that we've not been able to understand, that we've not had the mind or the tools or the vantage point to actually study and understand, and the debris was just opening. And it's almost a little on the nose in terms of it represents what it's doing for human beings, right? The debris so far is letting us see or reveal more about ourselves. It's just revealing how we care about each other. And hell is even talking this episode that Finola is talking to Brian about how maybe the bonds and the connections we build with each other are tangible, just like gravity. Like, it's not something that we talk about as having like an actual, a real thing. It's purely metaphorical, but maybe there is a real pull. And the show is kind of showing that so far, and that's kind of where it maybe gets a bit saccharine for some people. Maybe that's not to your taste. I get it. I'm not against it though, especially when we get to the end of the episode and Finola and Brian sit down and Brian says, "Hey, most people or I forget a lot of the time that there's still magic to be discovered in the universe or in the world." And she's like, "Nah, most people do." But he praises her for still being able to believe that there's still things to discover and and it's just kind of a more noble idea that I think it's good for the show to kind of explore that. So no, I dig that. I dig that a lot. I dig that again. So revealing things that are already here is a big part of it, and it obviously specifically with the humans and how we feel about each other and our own faults and our not even just our faults but also our positives, our triumphs. What makes us good as a species. What little of it there may be, but also literal scientific things too. So it works in the multiple levels. The Maddox stuff is kind of interesting this episode because we see him trying to make a deal with the Russians to trade a piece of the ship. The CIA have a piece that seems to change or alter the shape of metal, or possibly just matter in general. We see like one brief little clip on the phone of a sheet of metal being turned into a perfect cylinder, and the Russians want this for some reason. But what we discovered though afterwards, when the other CIA guy comes to his office, is that this was not something that he was doing on behalf of the CIA. This is something he is doing off the books, and he's very distressed, clearly, when the CIA seem to know that this Russian guy is on US soil and that he's being monitored, because this is going to make any sort of trade he's going to do much more difficult. We see him be stressed out later in the episode, throwing a chair into a piece of debris, and the chair just sort of like goes through it like a portal, and then it slides back in behind him, and he keeps like just looping and throwing it in. It's one of those. It's those little weird visuals that I really like at a concept like this. That he's just getting his stress out by throwing a chair into a portal and having it come back over and over again. But so that's interesting, and part of his motivation might have also been revealed, and that we see that he has a child who is in constant need of care, someone who's in a wheelchair. We don't get like a specific details of what his child is suffering from, or what the condition is, or what their life is like specifically. We get a brief glimpse of them sitting in the chair in the background, and the carer saying, "Hey, I have to go pick up my kid from school. Can you come and come home and relieve me?" Essentially, and I would suspect that Maddox, who so far has felt relatively shady, is maybe going to be a little bit more complex, and that we're probably going to have some sympathy for whatever his motivations are. I mean, it's not a huge leap to think that maybe his motivations are to do with helping his own child. So that could be an element here. Maybe he'll still always be shady in how he does things. Maybe we'll always see him as kind of this shades of grey character, someone who may even feel more villainous to our main characters. But given that a lot of the show is dealing with human connections and how we feel about each other and how that saves us or keeps us alive or keeps us fighting, the idea that he's doing what he's doing to fight for his own child does tie into those themes and might ultimately marry the themes of the season together really well when it all comes to a sort of head of some kind. But alternatively, it could just more be that, okay, there's a bit more layers to him. We have some sympathy, understand why he's doing what he's doing, but ultimately he's always going to be somewhat more tragic in who he is and what he ends up sort of going through or putting other people through or whatever. Because he's not been my favourite part of the show by any means. I think the Maddox stuff back at the CIA and the shady, they don't trust each other, like that stuff's not been particularly exciting. I've definitely been more into the actual investigation of the sci-fi stuff, and the two leads who, again, not the best off the page running in episode 1 main characters ever, but I think likable enough, and it's just adding a little bit to it as it goes. But yeah, I was into this episode. I found myself looking forward to watching it before I did. and I find myself looking forward to the next episode a little bit. It's filling a very specific niche, like I said, a specific void that used to be really common in my TV viewing and has been missing for a long time. Now, obviously, myself and Connor have also been reviewing Superman and Lois from the CW, and that's also been kind of like the other network show right now that's, hey, surprisingly kind of into this. And it's nice to actually want to watch a couple of network shows because there is a place for them, and they are different. I think objectively, in a lot of ways, the more prestigious shows are better, but there's a lot of things that are offered from a show like this that those can, and the ongoing adventures and the weird things that these characters are running into is something that I think there's room for in people's life or TV viewing habits or whatever, right? Certainly room for it in mine. So yes, I'm into it. I'm looking forward to the next one, and we'll see how things are going. I suppose I should mention the dad stuff because there was an update at the end about how Finola took her dad's watch as a memento, a keepsake from his body, but seemingly some time was missing from the security feed, and the body was swapped out, and whoever swapped the body out with the replacement didn't realize that the watch was taken, so the watch is still there. And it kind of confirms that, okay, something shady went on here, the body was swapped. I wonder if we're going to get a thing where he slowed down his heart rate to appear dead, sort of nonsense. So it really was him in the morgue until Finola left, and then some switcheroo happened. But either way, it's not his body in the coffin. Not surprising, given that we've seen images of him up walking around. So we'll do more with that in the coming episodes. So, no. I'm into it. I mean, it's not perfect. There's definitely some stuff that, hey, it'd be great if they had more time to really sit and like be in awe of the mystery of this square, and with maybe they'll jump into some conclusions a little too quickly because they have to squeeze it into just over 40 minutes. But I'm enjoying discovering what they're doing each week. So, and I think it's one of these things where you build an attachment over just the repetition almost of joining these characters every week. And you hope that the writers kind of step up and find their footing a little bit as they go as well, and you marry those two things together and you have a bond between human and TV show. The type of bond that is tangible, much like the bond between humans that Finola talks about. So there you go, that's my thoughts on episode 3. Let me know what you thought of this one in the comments below. Please do like and subscribe and all that stuff. It's really important on YouTube. It's what helps YouTube algorithms share the video out to more people, and it leads to success. So please do hit the like button if you enjoy me rambling on about this every week and any other content we have. You can also support, of course, everything we do over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV for as little as $1 per month and get some bonuses for your troubles. But otherwise, that is us. So thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?